As we get ready to dive into tapestry, we thought it might be helpful to think a little bit about what it actually is, and maybe look at some examples of some really wonderful contemporary tapestries to give you ideas and some inspiration. According to Wikipedia, tapestry is a form of textile art traditionally woven by hand on a loom. Tapestry is a weft-faced weaving in which all the warp threads are hidden in the completed work, unlike cloth weaving where both the warp and weft threads may be visible. The key parts of this are that the warp threads, which are there for the structure, are completely hidden by the weft, and that also tapestry is traditionally done by hand. I picked Archie Brennan to feature first, partly because he's been an incredibly influential artist in the world of tapestry, but also because he represents both of the different kind of creative channels for weavers that we'll be talking about. One being the individual artist weaver, where the artist and the weaver are one person, one and the same. The weaver is creating their own design, as you see in this case, in this piece of Archie Brennan's. Archie also was an apprentice at a very early age and came up through Dovecot Studios, which is one of the largest and most famous tapestry studios in the world. So he was trained in the tradition of being someone who rendered the work of other artists in tapestry, and creating a space for himself to do his own creative work was a big part of his legacy to weavers who are doing work now. When you talk about tapestry, a lot of people automatically think of the American Southwest, where you have Rio Grande weavers or Navajo weavers coming together with these kind of intense, very complex, abstract designs, but where the weaving is done in a very linear and geometric fashion. This is the work of Irvin Trujillo in Chimayo, New Mexico, who's one of the most famous weavers in that tradition. Connie Lippert is one of my favorite tapestry artists. She works in Wedge Weave, which you'll have to ask Mina about. She knows a lot more about it and practices Wedge Weave, so a lot more knowledge on her part than mine. I love Connie's use of color and the kind of compositions that she comes up with. There's always something new, even though some of the lines in Wedge Weave are dictated by that particular format of weaving. There's always something new and inventive in her work. Sarah Sweat is one of my absolute heroes in the weaving world. I've chosen two of her pieces to include in this slideshow. The first one on the right is very whimsical and fanciful. It definitely tells a story through the weaving. But if you look at it technically, there's actually an extraordinary amount of detail in this piece and some interesting effects. For example, the reflections in the water. You can see a double border. If you look in the upper left, where there's a frame within a frame in the upper left and lower right. So lots of interesting and complex things going on in this weaving, and the subject matter is just fanciful and wonderful and able to tell a story. On the left, the piece included there is part of a series that she did that was kind of inside the storyteller's head. So it was composed from notes on scraps of paper, partial bits of stories written with a faulty typewriter, and then over the tops of these notes, ink was spilled or coffee spills or editor's marks, and she managed to weave all of that into the weaving. As I talk about some of these weavers, keep in mind too that many of them have blogs or websites. You can also go to the American Tapestry Alliance website and look at artist pages to see people's work and get some ideas and some inspiration. Rebecca Metzoff is currently one of the most influential individual teachers in the United States. She recently published a book about weaving, which you'll see referred to a lot in this course, and she teaches online courses. So a lot of people have studied with her online at different points, taking different classes. These three pieces, I think, show the variety of different things that that a single artist can come up with. The one on the right is part of her Emergence series, and you can see she's done some absolutely wonderful things with transparency and hatching and shading to create transparencies, and that'll all make a little bit more sense to you in a few weeks. But one of the things Rebecca does is she hand dyes all of her yarn in many of her pieces, as many weavers do. But the Emergence series is all done with hand dyed yarns. And if you look carefully, you can see subtle variations in the reds and oranges from the left moving to the right, and also within that transparency section where the big spiral is. The piece in the center is a small piece that she did in response to the Cameron Peak fire in Colorado this summer, of just watching one of her favorite wilderness areas literally go up in smoke. And then the refugee blanket in the lower left was just a bit of commentary, and she used weaving as a medium to express that. Now we're going to talk for a moment about something that is wonderful but is not tapestry weaving, and that's jacquard weaving. A lot of people confuse jacquard with tapestry because it's often used in similar ways as storytelling, and from the very earliest tapestries that has been a part of the tapestry tradition. This particular piece was done by Mary Burns. It's called Birch Bark Canoe Building, and it was done on a jacquard loom, a modern jacquard that controls each of 1,320 warp threads individually, giving her a lot of very fine control over the design. In saying that this isn't tapestry, that's not to say it isn't art. It absolutely is. But the method where you've got the loom controlling the detail in the image is very different from the hand-manipulated techniques of the traditional tapestry weaver. As an interesting aside, jacquard punch cards, which you'll see in just a moment, actually far predated computers, and the design for jacquard looms actually had an influence on the decisions about how to design computers and feed data into them. I'm sure you can see right away on this slide why people sometimes say that the jacquard loom was actually the first computer. On the left, there's actually a jacquard, and you can see how the in a traditional old jacquard, the cards were fed in over the top of the loom, and then on the right, you can see detail of the cards. Going back to the two kind of parallel tracks of the independent artist weaver versus the studio weaver in the larger format studios, this is an image showing a view down onto the weaving floor at Dovecot Studios, taken from the gallery balcony up above. And so if you look at the looms there, you can see like three very large scale looms on each side, a big, huge gun tufting loom in the back that they use to make rugs, and then individual frame looms. You can see one kind of in the center lower part of the photograph where a weaver is working on maybe a smaller sample or maybe a piece of their own. But this is where some of the really large scale works in the UK are woven, is at Dovecot Studios. They do have an apprentice program there, and even now people apprentice at a fairly young age or fairly early in their art careers to become apprentices and then novice weavers and then full weavers and eventually master weavers at Dovecot. And again, Archie Brennan, whose image we showed at the very beginning, was an apprentice at Dovecot in his early years. This is just an example of what can be accomplished with a studio of weavers working together on rendering a painting. This is the large tree group tapestry, which is currently on show at the National Museum of Scotland. It was woven by Dovecot weavers, and this is all using natural undyed wool gathered from sheep and spun, some of it by hand, by local weavers all over the UK. And finally, some pieces from weavers just like you. We have a little egg breakfast piece that's done just 2 warps wide on most of the details. Some hearts, and you can see that is done on a loom with teeth holding the warp, just like the ones we're using. In the lower right, a very simple geometric design on a saffron with the metal teeth, just like the ones we're using. Here we have some simple geometric forms, mostly triangles, done in different colors, a very appealing little tapestry, and very even work. In the center, we have a little bit more accomplished tapestry. This is Charlotte's Web, of course, and this is done by, again, a more experienced tapestry weaver. It was part of the Renditions exhibition, which is an unjuried small format exhibition sponsored by the American Tapestry Alliance that a lot of weavers participate in, and a really great opportunity to show your work. Lots of different varieties of skill levels take part in that every year. In the lower right, we have a wedge weave showing some trees against a dark sky background. Lovely little piece, and Mina can tell you more about wedge weave techniques, and she uses that extensively. And the beauty of just really simple lines and shapes and forms. There's a lot that you can do with techniques no more complicated than what we're going to learn over the course of this workshop. So hopefully you've gotten a little bit of inspiration here and some places to go back to when you want to rest your hands and think about weaving.